Okay. That pop-up that came up. So, good morning. Good to be here with you this morning. I'd like to say thank you for all the people this morning who told me happy birthday. 26 was a good year. 65 would be even better. I can't wait. Get to use my senior discount at lunch today, so it'll be real good. The real good thing about it being your birthday is you can, and I did, eat cake for breakfast. So, when it's your birthday, I encourage you to do the same thing. It's pretty nice. But this morning, we are going to be talking about a series that we've done so far of Jesus versus the Pharisees. So, we get to watch Jesus constantly outwit his opponents, even though they're really not on his level. But today we're going to look at Jesus telling them the parable of the lost sheep. So, if you will, open up to Luke chapter 15. That's where we're going to be taking a look. Luke chapter 15. And as we go there, I'll also remind us of something that probably most of us know anyway. Not that I was alive when this happened, but back in the campaign, the presidential campaign, 1984, whenever Ronald Reagan is going up against Walter Mondale, there's a famous moment from one of the debates that they were having whenever the issue of age comes up. And again, you may be very familiar with this, but Ronald Reagan is 73 years old at the time, which makes him the oldest at that point presidential candidate. And so the question or the issue that's brought up is age. And Reagan says, pretty famously, "I want you to know that also I will not make my age an issue of this campaign. I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience." Well, the point for us in this lesson is that sometimes an accusation can be a compliment. And we're going to find that to be the case with Jesus, who's accused by the Pharisees and says, yeah, you're right. Let me tell you how that works. So that's what we're going to keep in mind as we look into, of course, a little bit of the background before we get to our text, because we have to always know the context of what it is that we're reading. And the context starts back in chapter 14. So we'll take just a second, go back to chapter 14, verse 1. It says, "Now as it happened, as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, that they watched him closely." So every time that the Pharisees are close to Jesus, they are going to be watching him, looking for something that they think that he's going to do wrong. And this is the same situation that we find him in. But if we go down a little bit further, down to chapter 14 still, verse 25. We'll go ahead and read this. It says, "Now great multitudes went with him, and he turned and said to them." So he's going to speak to them a certain parable. In these chapters, or in the chapter before our chapter 14, Jesus encounters this Pharisee. He enters his house, and they look for a mistake. But then what happens after this is there's a man who is lame, and Jesus heals him. And he says, "Hey, is it lawful for me to heal on the Sabbath?" Of course, if the Pharisees answer, "Yes, it's lawful for you to heal on the Sabbath," they're confirming that he can heal, that he has some special power from God. If they say no, well, then things don't work out for him either. So he traps him there. But then he goes on, and he teaches them about taking the lowest spot at a meal. Now, for them, that was kind of a social thing. If you were important, you got to sit near the head of the table. But he says, don't do that. Wait and get invited to sit up there. And then we come down later, he says, or talks about the parable of the Great Supper, which is a worthwhile read in its own right, but not our parable for today. But in verse 25, it's implied then that he leaves from the Pharisee's house, and he's on his way somewhere else. And that's when this great multitude draws together. But what's neat about this is that Jesus is actually acting out the parable of the Great Supper that he just told. So go back to verse 21 in chapter 14 of Luke. Verse 21, it says, "So that servant came and reported these things to his master, and then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, 'Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind.'" So Jesus is in the house of the rich people, the important people, the Pharisees, the religious rulers, and they won't listen. No surprise there, but when they won't listen, what do? Well, Jesus just told the parable. You go out in the streets and you find the people that are unimportant, the people that are poor, the people that are hurting, the people that are sick, the people that are sinners. That's exactly what Jesus does. And that's when we get to chapter 15 now, in verse 1, it says, Then all the tax collectors and sinners drew near to hear him. Okay, so Jesus has just, again, acted out in this parable that he just told. He went from the rich, they wouldn't listen, now to the poor, and to the supposedly religious, to the sinners. Then in verse 2, we have the accusation. The Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, This man receives sinners and eats with them. So we have a couple of characters that we need to address here because they're going to be important for the parable that's told. We have the Pharisees and the scribes. We've talked a lot about them, but they are the religious rulers. The Pharisees at least, are also kind of political rulers in that time as well. But they're both, the Pharisees and the scribes, supposed to be experts in the law. And they are, but they're experts in the rabbinical tradition that's been added on to the law. And they really care a little bit more about that than they do the original law of Moses. And then we have the sinners and the tax collectors. Now, tax collectors probably know this anyway, but they were known for taking a lot more than they were supposed to. The Roman government gave them authority to make money off of taking taxes. So if you had a $100 tax bill, they're supposed to charge you $110. So they get to take their little cut, and everybody's happy, in theory. But instead, they're not taking $110. They're taking $200 from you, and they're keeping an extra $100, and they're robbing the people in this way. But they, of course, are considered to be sinners by the Pharisees, and of course, they represent the oppressive Roman government that's ruling over Judea at this time. And then it says sinners. Well, who are sinners? Well, we'd say people are sinners, but specifically the Pharisees and the scribes look at sinners, that term, as being those who are overtly sinning, those who are sinning out in the open. So we might say that it would be criminals, it would be people living in adultery, it would be prostitutes, it would be people that are in sin and it's obvious, and everyone can see that it's obvious. And so these people are coming to Jesus. Because the Pharisees wouldn't listen to him anyway, but these people start to come to Jesus. And this is his audience when we start to get into this parable. And like I said, that'll come into play in just a minute. But the accusation in verse 2 from the Pharisees is, this man receives sinners. The original word, it means receives, but probably a better translation is welcomes. So he welcomes them. He sort of invites them even is the idea. And that's the accusation. Also, we sing a song that says that Christ receiveth sinful men. That's this verse. It's kind of funny that we sing that in a happy way, when in this verse it's an accusation against him, as if he's doing something wrong. But Christ receives sinful men. Well, thank God he does that, right? Because that means he receives us. If Christ didn't receive sinful people, then nobody would be saved. But Christ receives them. So Jesus, in response to this accusation, isn't going to just tell them what is true, but instead he's going to show them through a parable. That's what we're going to take a look at here in the story. So the parable, verse 3 says, so he spoke this parable to them. Say, what is a parable? Just remind yourselves here again. It's an analogy. It's a story. But it's a story that is intended to give a different message. It's supposed to be easily understood by those willing to listen. Which means the Pharisees might not have even understood it, but the common people would. Because parables also are known for using what is very common to everybody. Now for us, none of us are shepherds, well except for Fred, but none of the rest of us keep any sheep. So it's not common for us. But in that day and in that area, it would have been common. You would have walked by pastures with sheep in them all the time. So it was common to them. But again, we need to see who the audience is. We said there were three groups here, or three people. There's Christ, there are the sinners, and there are the Pharisees and scribes. So those three groups, though, are who we're looking at. And all three of them will be addressed in this parable. but it's crucial to know who Jesus is addressing. If I look at this text and I start in verse 4, and I say, I'm just going to read verses 4 through 7, and I'm going to understand this parable, I can't. I won't, because I don't know who the audience is. Jesus doesn't just tell a story. He tells a story about the people who are there for their benefit. So we have to identify what group is what within the parable that he tells. And we'll do that. But for now, we just know that he will address the sinners, he'll address the Pharisees, and he'll justify his own position. He'll defend himself from the accusation that they've made. So the story, briefly, is pretty much just a normal story. This is what would naturally happen in day-to-day events. And there's a point to it, but Jesus just says in verse 4, "What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he is found it?" So the question's simple. And I think mostly this question is probably addressed to the Pharisees. But he's saying, which of you, if you have 100 sheep, and you know where 99 are and they're safe, which one of you would not go and look for the one? And the answer, of course, it's a rhetorical question, but the answer is all of you would, right? So if you've got a lost sheep, you're going to go look for it. Okay, let's go a little bit farther. Verse 5, it says, "And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing." And then he invites other people over to rejoice with him. So it's, again, just a natural response. If you're a shepherd and you lose a sheep, you're going to go look for it. When you find it, you're going to rejoice. You're going to be happy about it. Makes sense. That's the story. But Jesus also tells us the moral of the story. He just outlines it for us in verse 7. He says, "I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance." So that's the story. And the moral of the story is, not just in terms of sheep, but in terms of humans, this is still true. That if there are 99 saved humans, but one is lost, and it is saved, then there will be more rejoicing for that one than the 99. Okay? So how does this apply to the three groups, or Jesus and the other two groups that are present for this parable being told? Let's start with Jesus. Like we said, this defends Jesus. Because the accusation has been made that Jesus welcomes sinners, that he receives sinners, and he eats with them, which means he kind of approves of their behaviors, the suggestion. And Jesus says, "I don't just welcome sinners, I go out and I look for sinners. I don't just receive sinners, I'm searching for sinners." He takes an accusation, he makes it into a compliment to say, "Yeah, you're right. I do receive sinners. In fact, that's why I'm here. I've come so that I could seek and save that which was lost. I've come to the lost sheep of Israel," as he refers to them. So Jesus, again, takes this as a compliment of sorts. Jesus is the good shepherd, and he will go to the ends of the earth to search out those lost sheep. He doesn't just welcome them, but he looks for them. So the accusation is he associates with them, and his response is, "I don't associate with them, I'm searching for them." Let me try to make a brief application before we actually get to the applications. I think we're probably guilty of some of the accusation from the Pharisees. Because the Pharisees say, "You associate with sinners." And I look at myself and I look at us and I think, yeah, I do associate with sinners. But how often am I searching for them? Jesus' response justifies himself, but I don't know that our response does. Because again, the Pharisees say, "You associate with sinners." And I say, "Yeah, I've got some friends that are sinners. I know people that are sinners. I hang out with people that are sinners." And I don't mean Christians. I mean people that are lost, people outside of the church. That's what we're talking about. But am I searching for their souls? I don't know. If not, then the Pharisees are right about me. And I'm not justified the same way that Jesus is. Let's keep moving, though. Second thing is for the sinners themselves. So again, this story is told not just for the benefit of Jesus, or not just for our benefit, but for the people that are there when he tells the story. So those who are sinners. Can you imagine the group of people that's around him? The Pharisees look at them and they say, oh, these pitiful people, these people lost in sin, I would not be caught dead with them. But these people around him, the criminals, the prostitutes, the adulterers, the people that are publicly known to be sinners, can you imagine what they think when they hear this story? When they hear Jesus say these words and they say, you mean someone's looking for me? You mean even in spite of everything I've done, somebody cares enough to come look for me? When the religious leaders of their day have told them again and again, get away from me, you sinner. I don't want anything to do with you. And Jesus says, I'm looking for you. And I will welcome you. The difference in tone makes all the difference for them. And the third thing, of course, is the Pharisees. And the Pharisees are condemned by this parable. Whether or not they recognize it, they're condemned. So Jesus is showing them what true spiritual leadership looks like. Spiritual leadership is not their understanding of it. It's not just looking at people and assigning blame and saying, oh, that person's a sinner. Oh, they're a sinner over there, and they're a sinner. That's not what true spiritual leadership looks like. And it's not about avoiding sinners either, as Jesus is trying to show them. It's not, oh, that person's a sinner, so I'm going to stay on the other side of the road from them. Instead, spiritual leadership is about helping people. It's about searching for those lost souls. So Jesus is defending himself. He's also welcoming the sinners that have come to him. And he's also condemning those religious leaders of their time for not being spiritual leaders, but instead worldly leaders. They look out for themselves, but not necessarily for the lost. 2 points specifically that I think the Pharisees should have got. I don't know if they did. One, if you look in verse 4 again, verse 4 it says, what man of you having 100 sheep, if he loses one, doesn't leave the 99, go look for that sheep? And again, we said the answer is, yeah, if you're a shepherd, that's exactly what you do. And the Pharisees even would probably do that. So what does that mean? They would go and look for one sheep, but they won't look for a lost soul. So one of the points here is that the Pharisees care more about an animal that they've lost than a soul that will spend eternity in hell because they won't go looking for it. Second point, down in verse 7, we'll read that again. It says, I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. When we read this story, there's a few times Jesus does this actually. It's kind of tempting to look at this and say, oh, okay, so the Pharisees are the 99, right? They're the just people that need no repentance. I don't think so. I think Jesus is showing by a little bit of irony here, you think that you are the 99. You think, Pharisees, that you are those just persons who need no repentance. And the truth is, if you think you're part of the 99, why bother with the one? But Jesus says, you think you're part of the 99, but if you really are, then the job of the 99 is to go look for the one. What do we learn? A few things, a few applications. Actually, I think they're all in the form of questions, or just about, but should we welcome sinners? Answer, yes. Yes, we should. Now, of course, there's a warning to that you can't stay a sinner. Jesus, God, the Bible, they don't view people who have been converted as sinners any longer. The Bible doesn't use that terminology about people. After they have been saved, they're known as saved. They're known as saints. But before that point, they are sinners. So, should we welcome sinners? Yes. How are you going to save someone if you don't ever welcome a sinner? How are you going to save someone that's lost if you don't welcome the lost? It can't happen. If we don't welcome sinners, if we don't welcome the lost, that makes us the Pharisees. So we have to welcome sinners if we're going to save anyone. And then the other question is, do we do that? Do we welcome sinners? Individually, as a church, do we welcome sinners? Do we look at people that are lost in the world and say, yeah, those are the people that we want to come to us, whether on an individual basis or as a church? And I don't know that we do a great job of that. I think a lot of times we can come off as being, not intentionally, but being a little bit holier, being a little bit, well, we see ourselves as being just here, or at least we're part of that 99. We certainly don't want to go looking for the others. But do we seek out those who are lost? And I think this is where we just have to stomp on our own toes. Do we seek out those who are lost? I think the truth is most of us would be terrible shepherds. Because we would see some sheep, and we know we've got our 99, but we see that sheep and they're just wandering off, going farther and farther away. And then they go over the hill and they're out of sight, and we think, oh man, that's a shame. I hope they come back. I really hope that person comes back. Oh well. How often do we do that as a church? How often do we see someone leave the church and we say, oh, I hope they come back. It'd sure be nice. Boy, it's a real pity we lost that person. But we don't go looking for them. It's not quite the parable Jesus tells, but the 99, or however many are here this morning, the 59. Are we looking for the 60th sheep that's out there lost? And then the question is, are we just satisfied being part of that 99? And there is satisfaction that comes from being in that group, from knowing that you are part of the group that's been saved. That's great, that's wonderful, but if you are, then you have that job of looking for the lost sheep. But sometimes we're satisfied to let that one wander alone. This morning, this is the invitation of the lesson, because it's the invitation of Jesus' parable here as well. He says, I say to you likewise, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. He's talking about you. Is that interesting? Put yourself in the story for a second, and in your life. You remember the day that you were added to the Lord's church through baptism. Have you ever thought about what it looked like in heaven when that happened? Now, I know there were people here that rejoiced when that happened. I'm sure there were people around you that were joyous at that event. Do you know whenever you came up out of that water, can you imagine the sound in heaven? The 10,000 times 10,000 angels singing praises. Why? Because you came back to God. Maybe that hasn't happened for you yet. This morning you can make that happen. This morning we'll rejoice with you. And this morning, heaven will rejoice with you as well. This morning, you strayed away from God. If you are in that group of 100 and you're that one, and you've left the 99, this is the time to come back as well. And this morning, if there's anything the church can do for you, or anything that we can do for you, or if you just need to make yourself right with God, this is the time. If there's anything we can do, come forward now as we stand, as we sing.